Greetings to all who wish to be greeted. I'm MegaPacKid, and this is my game shelf. Happy Valentine's Day! Love is in the air, and you know what that means? Re-experiencing love stories. There are so many great love stories that people will point to. Great and iconic stories, like Romeo and Juliet, about two teenagers who know each other for 3 days and then die at the end. Okay, well, what about Titanic, a movie about an old woman who is at the end of her life, and instead of remembering the 70 years she's had with her husband and family, remembers the guy she hooked up with on a boat? Okay, well, maybe those two examples aren't great, but what about Grease! Grease has to be one of the most iconic movie musicals of all time. I consistently hear people talk about it. I even had a friend who was in a stage production of Grease very recently. It starred John Travolta, who of course had a prosperous acting career, being in such other iconic films like Pulp Fiction. It got a sequel, it got a Wii game, it got a prequel series on Paramount Plus. My mom first showed me Grease when I was a little kid because she'd remembered liking the movie, and I'll be honest, I don't really remember a whole lot of it. So let's watch the movie and see how it holds up. Not by a lot. This might be an unpopular opinion, but before you go after me for it, I want you to re-watch Grease. I obviously can't do it justice just by making this video. I think it would be better for you to watch the film and make your own opinion. It's available on Max. But I gotta be honest, I did not like this movie. The film does so many things right. The performances, the choreography, the music, it's all incredible. But where the film falls flat is perhaps one of, if not the most important elements. And that's the story. The film opens with Danny Zuko and Sandra Dee on the beach, and clearly Danny wants to do more physical things than Sandra wants to. And I gotta be honest, I think it's okay to establish boundaries in a relationship. I think it's okay to want something that the person you're with doesn't necessarily want. I think that's all fine, and I think the scene does it well. He backs off when Sandra doesn't want to go as far as he does, and I feel that's respectable. The two are lamenting their summer fling ending because summer is ending, and Sandra was going back to Australia, whereas Danny was going to stay in California in school. Much to the surprise of everyone, Sandra is actually transferring to the same school that Danny goes, which will be important after Tell Me More, which has to be one of my favorite songs in the musical. It's a good thing it's so early. Start off on a high note, that's how I feel. Sandra's talking to the gals about how sweet this guy at the beach she met over the summer was. And Danny is talking to the boys about how he got some.
Come on, you don't want to hear all the horny details. Are you telling me? I will tell you.
Did I mention I like the music? The lyrics are a bit tragic. While we didn't see their entire summer fling, we know that they have very different interpretations of what happened, and it's also very likely that Danny is lying, whereas Sandra is telling the truth. Sandra is painted as a rule follower, whereas Danny is a T-bird. He's a guy, he breaks rules, he cuts class, he doesn't do well in school. He's too cool for that sort of thing. He's too cool for anyone other than the T-birds. Danny feels a need to put on a front with a bunch of people who are supposed to be his friends, and I honestly don't like it. I think Danny's doing something really bad here. Now, of course, he thinks that he's never going to see Sandra again, so telling the guys that she put out and he was really able to rock her world, that's something that makes sense, at least in his mind, to do, because he's not going to have to deal with the consequences of that lie. Until the Pink Ladies introduce Sandra to Danny yet again. See, when Sandra mentions that the guy she met's name was Danny Zuko, they all immediately know who she's talking about, and they know that he is absolutely full of crap. So they wanted him to actually confront this relationship that he built. They do meet, and Danny drops the mask for a second. He's genuinely excited and thrilled to see his summer love again. But then he realizes that the T-Birds are still right behind him, and instead of sticking with Sandra, he goes back to fronting. I like to view this scene as an allegory for autistic masking. He very briefly felt like he could be himself and vulnerable with his safe person. But then he realized that he's still out in society and has a role he needs to maintain, a mask he needs to wear. I'm sure that wasn't the filmmaker's intention, but I'm trying to get something good out of this film's story, and the story as it is, with literal interpretation, is not cutting it. If I remember correctly, Sandra isn't officially let into the Pink Ladies, but she just hangs out with them throughout the whole movie, the whole school year, it seems. Danny and Sandra just don't talk to each other for a while. It takes a while for them to actually meet up again at a diner, where Sandra is dating someone else, an athlete. It's unclear if she's actually interested in this guy or if it's a ploy to make Danny jealous and finally shape up, but it works if it was. Danny is faced with his hubris when he tries to compete with this athlete by saying he could run circles around him and all of his friends, and so he joins a sports team. Well, he tries to. He meets with the coach and he tries to go through every sport, but continuously gets out because he is a violent person. So the coach decides to give him a non-contact sport, running. Well, track. We get to see Danny on the track field, and he falls over in front of Sandra, and it's a little bit of a Florence Nightingale effect. It immediately works, and they're pretty much back together. Of course, Sandra still has feelings for him. In her words, she's hopelessly devoted to him. So it makes sense that they get back together rather quickly. But what doesn't make sense is that Danny doesn't seem to fully mend his ways. He's good for a while, but then at the drive-in, he tries to bite off more than Sandra's willing to let him chew. There's also this guy from a rival gang called the Scorpions. I know nothing about them or him because he doesn't even have any dialogue. Oh, wait, except for one scene where he insults Rizzo, who later gets with him to make her actual boyfriend jealous. I truly do not understand the dynamics of this film. Maybe it's because I'm no longer in high school and that's where all of these characters are supposed to be. But also, if they're supposed to be in high school, why are they all in their 30s? This guy is also important for the climax of the film, which is a race. The T-Birds and Scorpions challenge each other. Sandra happens to go because she wants to talk to Danny. For some reason, he still hasn't mended his ways, but for some reason she still wants to talk to him. And then Danny, through circumstances, happens to be in the race, and he races against the Scorpion guy. He wins. At the end of the race, Sandra does not go to talk to Danny. Instead, she runs into Frenchie, who she asks to help her do something that will make her happy. And what Sandra does is completely changes her appearance and aesthetic and the way that she acts so that she can fit in with the T-Birds. Why? Danny already liked you. In fact, at the end of the movie, Danny's talking about how he's a letterman now in track, which you might think that I skipped over Danny's arc of getting good at track. I didn't. The movie did. They don't focus on it at all until the end of the film when they're like, yeah, he got his letter. You know, he did it for Sandra, because he says that to the T-Birds. He says, I'll do anything to keep Sandra. And then Sandra comes in just completely glowed up. I'm putting that in quotes because she didn't need it. And it's just so frustrating to me. Instead of using it as an opportunity to show how both of them changed themselves for the other when they didn't need to do that, Danny just goes with it. In fact, he takes off his Letterman jacket. So yeah, they're back together now. They go in a car, which goes into the sky, and that's the end of the movie. I did not like this film, and I don't recommend watching it. The story is just awful. The conflict is all resolved passively. It just happens to resolve itself instead of the characters actually doing something to solve their conflicts. The men seem to only care about sex, Danny included, which is weird because you'd think his arc would be breaking from the mold that the T-Birds seem to have expected him to be in. This toxic masculinity. Grease is the perfect example of that term not just being a buzzword, but a real issue. Not this Grease, the movie. I realize I'm yelling a lot, but I'm incredibly passionate about this. Grease is just not great as a story. The soundtrack is great, the choreography is great, the performances are absolutely fantastic. I really like those elements of the film, but the story makes it a 1 out of 10 for me. I'll be honest, the reason I rewatched Grease isn't because it's technically a love story and it's Valentine's Day. I rewatched Grease because one of my friends recommended to me the prequel series, Grease: Rise of the Pink Ladies, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I should rewatch it just to catch all the potential references that there will be. I'm so glad that I watched it because it is an amazing show. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that way you know when we go from Grease to Lesbos.